I'd like to call to order this special City Council meeting at 6:07 p.m. Please join us in a Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first order of business is the agenda. Councilor Roof.
I'll move to adopt the agenda.
There's a motion. There are no amendments, Councilor Roof?
There are none.
Okay. There's a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Is there a second? Councilor Busher seconds it. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of that motion on the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So we have our agenda. The first piece of business is an update about negotiations with the Burlington Town Center towards a final development agreement. And maybe we can have just a brief summary from the mayor for the public about what we're about to do, and then the chair will entertain motions on executive session. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, President Odell. Yes, we have continued to work on the final agreement, the development agreement. If people recall, the public recalls, the council approved a pre-development agreement in May of 2016. The concept from the beginning always was that there would be a additional document, a development agreement that would be approved before construction began. Work on that has gone on intermittently since the vote by the public last November. And there was some period of time where much of the development agreement discussion was on hold with the uncertainty regarding how the permits would be resolved. Since those permitting issues were resolved this summer, there's been a focused effort to finalize this development agreement, and we have updated the council previously on those efforts. It's been a couple months, I think, since our last executive session. My hope is that this may well be the final executive session on the development agreement, and confirm the council is pleased as a whole with where this is at, and this could be ready for action. I expect this will be public and before the council for action in the month of October, unless there's a surprise. But the intent with tonight was to have a final time for the council to be able to discuss the update after getting an update on the negotiations.
Great. So the first motion on the finding would be that premature disclosure of contract negotiations would be adverse to the city's interests. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Councilor Mason made the motion on the finding. Is there a second?
Second.
Councilor Roof seconds it. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Councilor Mason?
Based on that finding, I'd like to make a motion that we go into executive session with CEDO Director, Attorney Farkas, Beth Anderson, and the mayor, I believe.
And BED
and
officials?
BED as well. Okay, I'm sorry. In the room as well.
And mayor's office.
And the mayor's office.
Personnel. Very good. Is there a second? Councilor Shannon seconds it. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of that motion to go into executive session, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We carry unanimously, and we'll get the room ready for executive session, and our schedule calls us back in open session at 7 p.m. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to call the council back from recess, please. I'd like to call the council back from recess. They've been outside playing. Recess is over. So while we're gathering, just wanted to let people know what's going to happen now. we're going to have a presentation from Mr. Terry Dorman. Council, please come together now. We're going to have a presentation from Terry Dorman about each of the 3 finalists to purchase Burlington Telecom. At 7:30, that will take us to roughly 7:30. At 7:30, we will go to part 1 of the public forum, and we invite you to sign up to speak. And what we thought was, tonight we'll have public forum in 2 parts. So we'll take some public forum at 7:30, and then we're going to go right to questions and answers from the City Council for the public to hear the council's questions, hear the answers, and then after the Q&A session, assuming there are people who still would like to speak who didn't get a chance in part 1, we will reopen the public forum at that time and finish up. Because we do expect a lot of interest in speaking, we're going to set the clock at 2 o'clock, 2 minutes, and there's now a clock that can tell you how much time. Is that going to be a countdown? Yes, that will. Nice. So now you can watch that clock back there to tell you how much time you have left. So this is an innovation for tonight. So, so let's get going with it. Mr. Dorman and Mr. Bearclough, please come forward. Or maybe Stephen's just coming up later, whatever, however you want to handle it. Okay. And just a reminder to speak right into that mic so everyone can hear you clearly. And thank you very much for being here tonight, Mr. Dorman.
My pleasure. Just by way of background, as most of you know, we've been working with the city and with Burlington Telecom since March of 2010, initially doing an assessment of the situation with Citibank, and then in August of 2010 taking over the management of BT, and we've been through first the settlement with Citibank, the refinancing, and now the sale. I'm going to go through the 3 offers in alphabetical order, starting first with the purchase price. KBTL, purchase price $12 million. Shores, $30,800,000. Ting, $27,500,000. 2 footnotes. The Shores offer includes a reimbursement of fiscal 2018 capital spending. And so if BT did not spend in accordance with his budget, there would be a purchase price adjustment or clawback for the portion of that CapEx that was not spent. In our discussions with Shores, that was their initial approach to add a incentive to operating results for 2018, because as everybody knows, these agreements are coming in early in the fiscal 2018 year, and by the time the sale gets through the PUC, it will likely be towards the end or past the end of fiscal 2018. There have been discussions about an earnout or the potential for an earnout, and to date, going back to KBTL, the KBTL proposal or LOI does not provide for an earnout. There is a reference in the Shores LOI for an earnout.
Mr. Dorman, can you define earnout?
An earnout is paying the sellers or increasing the purchase price based on performance between the time of the LOI and the closing date. And so in this case, these offers all look to the 2017 results. That is the financial year that ended June 30, 2017. We're now into 2018. As most of you know, BT's performance has improved annually. The trajectory is good, and so in fairness, the seller, in this case, the city of Burlington and Blue Water, should be compensated for improved results to the extent there are improved results. Ting has, their LOI includes a provision for an earnout. They've added $500,000 if BT achieves $4,250,000 or greater in FY 2018 EBITDA. That's earnings before interest, taxes, and amortization. Shores has made a reference to and is discussing an earnout, but that we're not at the point to know how much that would be or the other components of it. There is the potential, therefore, for an increased purchase price. The Shores offer to be determined if there's an earnout beyond the $30,800,000. Ting takes the purchase price up to $28 million. Subtracting the Blue Water loan balance, which is the Merchants Bank Blue Water loan, we project the balance will be $5,540,000 at year end. It will go down a little in the next 6 months of FY, or the second half of FY 2018. It will bring the cash proceeds under the KBTL proposal to just under $6,460,000. The cash proceeds under the Shores at $25,260,000, and Ting $22,460,000. This will change very slightly should the city elect to accept equity in lieu of cash. The city share under KBTL, which in their LOI is at 12%, would actually increase to 13.46%. Shores would be 20.5%, and Ting 20.05%. There are certain additional terms. I think all of the buyers will have some requirements in their documents around the city contract. Okay. Some of the, all of the buyers will have certain requirements around the city contract. In the case of KBTL, they've requested 10 years, a city contract of 10 years. The Shores and Ting LOIs have not specified that, but in conversations with the parties, they expect that will be worked out in the early stage of documents. And as you recall, there's a period in the process where we're dealing with those critical elements of the documents, and this is one of them. All will have some requirements around the Church Street lease or option to purchase. In the case of KBTL, they would like a lease in perpetuity or an option to buy after 5 years. Shores and Ting have not weighed in with their specific requirements, but I would expect they would want either an option to buy or right of first refusal, and a lease with multiple renewal terms. The KBTL proposal includes a relocation of the Memorial Auditorium equipment. Shores has referenced it, but further discussion is required on Shores, and Ting has included the cost of the Memorial relocation in their offer. The KBTL LOI references certain ordinary course liabilities or that they accept be limited to AP in the ordinary course. I think all should be considered on what's known as a cash-free, debt-free basis. Just to be fairer to KBTL, I don't think that they should be having to provide for assuming any liabilities, any current accounts payable. That should be offset against accounts receivable. The timing of the Burlington build-out, I need to go back and reference the KBTL pro forma. I know that Shores and Ting both relied on BT's management plan, which is a build-out for all addresses passed with the exception of 120 homes by the end of fiscal 2019, so June of 2019. There has been some expression on the part of Ting about a willingness to potentially move faster, but I don't think that that could be analyzed until we understand the timing of a transaction. It would likely be late. It would likely be too late to make any changes in those plans. The only other term of significance is that under the Ting proposal, or Ting LOI, excuse me, the city would get a put right, that is the ability to require Ting to buy their equity back, but in exchange, Ting has asked for a right of first refusal, which would mean that if the city decided to sell its interest to a third party other than Ting, probably fairly unlikely, but something that the city could consider, Ting is seeking a right of first refusal.
And a right of first refusal says they can buy the shares.
Yes,
Position.
anything that the city is selling, they can buy back. The Ting LOI also references a to-be-negotiated put discount, meaning that if the city has the right to put that equity back in exchange for payment, then they would like a discount to the multiple that they are paying for the shares. And that has not been worked out. I expect that'll be a lively discussion if those discussions continue. That really sums up the high points, but if we could perhaps start on Q&A, then I could elaborate on those areas that the councilors would like more information on.
So I think thank you very much, Mr. Dorman. I think what I'd like to do is go to public forum now and then come back to the Q&A. And when we get to Q&A, I'll just make a few remarks so we kind of know how it's going to roll. Let's set the clock for 2 minutes, and we'll go until like maybe 7:45, see how far we get. So the first speaker is Trav Fryer, I believe, and he'll be followed by Matthew Kropp.
Oh boy, I get to go first. My thoughts are simply, why are all these people here? Why do we care about this? We're talking about, why is it important? We're talking about a state-of-the-art fiber network and community ownership. I think that's why it's interesting to people. And I won't go into the significance of why each of those is interesting, except that I would argue that number 2 is more important than number 1, being that I think if you take away number 2, community ownership and oversight, Burlington Telecom becomes much less compelling. I think digging into the weeds of the short-term legal and financial details seems to be blinding a lot of people to the key details, the key detail which trumps the other details, which is that BET is something very special with an amazing long-term future benefits for the city if you can keep that community ownership and oversight. And I think that is ultimately more important than it being a state-of-the-art fiber network. And that is, to me, the most important aspect of it. So if we take away that, it's not really an interesting thing after this. Thanks.
Thank you. Matthew Kropp to be followed by Rob Backus.
All right. Well, I'm back here again to talk up the Keep ET Local Co-op, and I have a few quick items I want to cover. The first is, I think it's useful to acknowledge that the co-op model is much less well known in terms of its intricacies by most of the population of the country. It's not taught in business schools, so I think it would behoove folks to really look into how co-op capital functions in order to fully understand the benefits. And I'd recommend particularly a lecture by Brent Hewitt from the UW, University of Wisconsin Center for the Study of Co-ops, entitled The Curious Case of Cooperative Capital. So if you want to have some riveting YouTube viewing, that would be useful. Second, I'd like to express particularly my concern about the Ting bid and its publicly traded status. Ting is traded on NASDAQ, I believe, and if you look at who owns the shares, it's mostly outsiders, and as you're all probably aware, publicly traded companies have a fiduciary obligation to act in the best interest of the shareholders, or they can be sued. And that, to me, is a red flag in terms of the possibility of them being acquired by a large player. And then all of this kind of discussion of, oh, we've got these anti-monopoly agreements in place. I don't have great confidence in the ability to really maintain that in the face of some substantial institutional investors saying, all right, Comcast has thrown down a pretty good bid, let's take it. And from a publicly traded corporation perspective, that looks like success. From the Burlington perspective, that looks like us really sort of losing out big time. I think that's a huge risk, and I think that should be seriously considered as you're considering these 3 deals. Finally, just process-wise, I want to sort of acknowledge how much volunteer effort from a lot of civically minded people in Burlington has gone into the Keep ET Local bid over the past 5 years, and I would encourage you guys to keep on schedule, because every 2 weeks that this is pushed back, we're taking up more capacity. So, thank you.
Thank you. Rob Backus, former city councilor, and then Alex Friend.
Thank you, President Nodell. About 17 years ago, the City Council was looking at the issue of who should have the downtown grocery store. There was a lot of pressure at that time to choose Shaw's because they were the big player, the corporate player that had the money. But what we as the City Council recognized at the time was, as a corporate player, they lacked an investment in our community as a community, the kind of investment we wanted from a downtown grocery store. And so we selected the co-op. It's clear that we did the right thing. The co-op is thriving, it is expanding. Shaw's, who knows what they would have done, but they would have done what any corporation does, is they would have protected the bottom line and done whatever made them the most money. That is why we need to keep Burlington Telecom locally owned, and the co-op is the best way to achieve that. The people who own Burlington Telecom will be the people of this city, the ratepayers for Burlington Telecom. I'm a user of Burlington Telecom, will all have an interest in keeping it up to date, modern, and under local control. That is really not an interest that any corporation which is not vested in this city is going to have. So if we want to protect our investment in Burlington Telecom, and we have a huge financial investment in Burlington Telecom already as a city, we need to keep Burlington Telecom local so that that investment is protected. I'd also just like to add quickly that The other two players are offering vastly more money than Keep Burlington Telecom Local is offering. Where are they going to get that from? They're going to get that out of the hides of the ratepayers. We are going to have rates big enough to give the return on that kind of investment that those investors will want, and that will be a high return. I, for one, don't want to be funding that return. I want to be funding my local business. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex Friend, to be followed by Walter Judge.
Can I request to speak at the second public session? Or do I have to
You
go now?
can.
All right.
Yep. I'll hold you off. Anyone else can have that option as well. Walter Judge. And then Barbie Alsop.
Thank you for taking my comments. I don't know whether I'm supposed to speak at this session or some other section of the meeting. I come before you just as a taxpayer in the city of Burlington, and we all benefit every day from services and goods that we purchase, and we enjoy them and we use them. I don't necessarily see why everything we purchase, everything we do, all services that we consume have to be locally owned. I'm very concerned about the offer that's being made by Keep BT Local, which is, I understand, a $10 or $12 million purchase funded by a 14% bank loan. I'm very concerned that the taxpayers of Burlington will be back before this board, before the city council again at some future date, because we've had a recession or a downturn in the economy, and Keep BT Local can't afford to make those debt payments. That's a staggering interest rate. So I would just urge the city council to keep in mind the taxpayers of the city of Burlington and take the financially responsible bid. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbie Alsop and then Alan Turnbull.
I'm very glad I get to go after him rather than in front of him, because I will tell him why we should keep this local. I'm a member of City Market. I bank at Vermont State Employees Credit Union. They're both locally owned. All the money made by those companies stays local, gets spent in the local economy, and helps Burlington. You give this contract to a for-profit company, they're for profit, and they will take the profit, and that money will leave Vermont. It won't stay here, it won't support our economy, and while they may talk very well about supporting the local business community, they're taking our money away. We've put the money into Burlington Telecom so far. We built the fiber network. Keep it local.
Thank you. Alan Turnbull and then Grace Ahmed.
Hi, thank you for the chance to speak with you. I really have questions rather than commentary. I'm paying a lot of attention to the money, and I know that we're all trained as Americans to always go for the most money, always. But I'd like to have answers to 3 questions. Has the council received legal advice or opinion as to whether there's a fiduciary imperative to favor the highest dollar purchase offers, or to give greater weight to the offered price in relation to the other factors that you're considering? Second, what, if any, local, state, or federal laws might compel the council to favor the highest possible bid relative to the other factors under consideration? And third, what, if any, contractual terms may be obligating or influencing the city or any city officials to favor the highest dollar bid in preference to the other factors? Thank you.
Thank you very much. People who are just coming in, we invite you to sign up for public forum. There'll also be yes, we're not done yet. We're just a little beyond 7:30, and we started public forum a little late. So for people who are just coming in, I wanted you to know you have time to sign up. You can talk now, you can talk later, And now we're going to go to Grace Ahmed, and she'll be followed by Carolyn Bates.
All right, thank you. So I have long been a big supporter of Keep BT Local's bid, and if there is any way that we can make the co-op deal work, I would love to see that happen. Reality pressing upon us, what I am asking for tonight is that you keep the offer for Shores Communication in the final two, because I think that that offer aligns with our values better than the offer from Ting. I think that they have more experience. Their company Orbital has been doing broadband internet on fiber since 2001, and Ting has only been doing broadband fiber since 2015. They have a longer rate guarantee for subscribers. 5 years is almost double 30 months. 30 months isn't even 3 years. And I'm concerned that we're going to end up placating people by keeping maybe Ting and keep BT Local in as the final two, and then we're going to get the worst one instead of the second best one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carolyn Bates, and then Michael Long.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Bates, and I've been a business member and a homeowner. I'd say business member since 1973, homeowner since 1978 in Burlington. And with my business, the internet was just awful. I can't begin to tell you how many times I lost my email, I lost my clients, and then BT came along. I jumped on board as a beta with BT, and it has saved my business, it has enhanced my business, and it's an unbelievable asset to the city of Burlington to bring in new business, which I think you always want to do. Keep BT local. Why don't you, as city council, work with them like you did with City Market? Also, you know, with 7,000 members, we're saying with Keep BT Local, they don't have to pay to be a member, but with City Market, where I've been a member since the 1970s, they pay $200 apiece. So perhaps that's what we should do. And you take the 7,000 members times 200, and you have 14 million. Added to the 12 million, that's 26. And you've got to keep it local. How many millions of dollars have our taxpayers gone into the business of Burlington Telecom? 20, 30, 40? I have no clue. I don't think anyone does. Well, maybe you do. And that should not leave the state. That should not leave Burlington. That money must stay here. And you need to work with Keep BT Local and keep this a local co-op, just like you've done with Burlington Electric, and we've done with City Market, and I do with my bank. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Long, and then Vikas Manipudi.
Good evening. I want to support keeping Burlington Telecom local. I think the history and the context is really important here. Before, when Burlington Telecom was conceived, I think it was a great idea, but it didn't work out really well initially because of some problems with cash flow and marketing and secrecy and deception with regard to the 17 million that was misappropriated. The effort to kind of right that wrong that we're coming through now, which resulted from the settlement with Citibank, I think it's a noble effort, but I was disappointed that that settlement required the sale of the asset, because I believe that Burlington Telecom was sort of initially conceived and properly considered a public utility that should remain a public utility for the city, just as Burlington Electric is. But given that the city settlement doesn't allow that to happen, the co-op structure, as compared with the corporate structure, is a good compromise and something that I think keeps the the faith and the trust of the people, instead of taking an asset that the public contributed to, and once it's on its feet and working well and profitably, then selling it out from under them. So I think keeping BT local keeps ownership in the community, even though the city is divesting itself of the asset. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it Vikas? You'll correct me, and then Steve Goodkind.
It's Vikas.
Vikas, excuse me.
You're close. I'd just like to echo the sentiments of many of the other folks that have spoken and encourage people to support the Keep BT Local bid. And I'd also like to point out one of the things that kind of gets lost in the dollar amount conversation is the difference in bid price between what Keep BT Local has bid and the other bids. A lot of that comes back to shareholders and BT subscribers in equity. The subscriber owner model of a co-op really does keep that value and that the price of the whole utility local, and when subscriber owners get a share in that utility, any sort of profits come back to the subscribers. You know, there's a real dollar value in that that goes beyond just an influx of cash to the city at this moment, and I think that's a detail that sometimes gets lost in the conversation. So again, I would ask that the council please support the Keep BT Local bid.
Thank you. And Steve Goodkind, and then we'll come back to the council.
Thank you, President Nodell. I've been hearing a lot lately during the discussion of the sale of BT about how it should be made as a business decision. I think we should really understand that this sale process, driven by the Blue Order Agreement, has as much to do with business as a Russian election has to do with democracy. The Blue Order Agreement was conceived in a corrupt fashion, and there's a whole story to that. And its conditions are a sellout of the millions of dollars the citizens of Burlington have invested in BT. No good is going to come about from a sale under those conditions. The Blue Order Agreement, and I'm like a broken record, but the Blue Order Agreement must be brought out, must be terminated, bought out for a reasonable amount. The city should replace it with traditional financing. BT should not be sold, and if it is sold, it should only be done so with the approval of the voters. Keep Burlington Telecom local.
Thank you. All right, so and I'm going to close this part of the public forum and come back to the council and ask Mr. Dorman and Mr. Bearclough to come forward. And my thought is that we would go bidder by bidder in alphabetical order and take questions about each bid, and then move on to bidder number 2, and then move on to bidder number 3. So the purpose of tonight is to make sure that the council has correct factual understanding of the bids. So that is to say, tonight is not really the night for debate. Is there a question? Are we all set? Are we okay? Okay. So I was thinking that tonight is not really the night for debate, but really to make sure that our questions about the bids themselves are answered, and if our consultant and our legal team and the mayor do not know the answers, that they are going to go get the answers, so that by the time of our vote to narrow from 3 to 2, we do have all the information, as much as the information as we can get. Obviously a process that could go on forever but cannot go on forever. I will try to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to ask questions, and I'll probably kind of go from side to side. I'm seeing all kinds of questions over here. Are these questions about how we're going to proceed? Yeah. Yes, Councilor Shannon?
I have a few questions that are just broad questions for all three, and I wondered if there could be a time for rather than just the specific offers, to have questions that are broader than that.
Okay, sure. I think that's fine. If people have like the same question for all three, sure, we can do that. Is this also a procedural question, Councilor Mason?
Just to clarify, President Nodell, even though Mr. Dorman and Bearclaw are up, if we had a legal question, for example, we would ask it when that, so in theory, they're all at the table. Is that a fair?
Yes, in theory,
Okay.
they're all at the table, and then the legal questions will go over to the legal team.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, great. So are we ready to start? Okay. So if there are questions for all, anyone has questions for all three, why don't we start there? Okay. So, yes, okay. So does anyone have questions for all three? Counselor Dean. So, okay, so we're going to go Counselor Dean, Counselor Shannon, Counselor Wright. These are questions for all three. Counselor Dean.
Okay. So my question relates to Burlington taxpayers who are not BT subscribers. So all Burlington taxpayers contributed to the nearly $17 million inappropriately allocated to prop up BT in the years that it was close to financial failure. Under Ting, Schurz, and KBTL's offers, could you evaluate for us the current and future potential to recoup some of these monies for all the taxpayers of Burlington, not just that percentage of Burlington households and businesses that are current or future BT subscribers?
All of the offers have an equity component. The question of whether or not the city wants to, in effect, reinvest in the new entity is probably one that should be answered in connection with the risk profile of a municipality generally and the history of Burlington Telecom. But assuming that the decision is under all three to roll to equity, there is a share that is allocated to the city. In the case of KBTL, I calculated that at just under 13.5%. In the case of Schurz, 20.5%, and in the case of Ting, 20.05%. As a general comment, it must be borne in mind that there is still some amount of ongoing negotiation. If any of these parties want to make changes or clarifications to their offer, or if the city wants to make a request of one or more of the groups, to me that's fair game. So there is on the table now a discounted put right in the Ting LOI, which hasn't been fully negotiated, so it's hard to comment on how that will affect the city. All of the parties have provided projections. I think the next 5 years are probably the most valuable for the purpose of evaluating the various offers. The KBTL proposal will have debt service, which will have the effect of reducing the near-term cash that's available to shareholders. However, all of them have an equity component. So by definition, the larger equity component, if you believe the management of the three are going to be about the same, the two strategic buyers are providing a larger equity component for the city.
Can I do a follow-on? So just as an example, KBTL has proposed, you said 13.5% as a carried interest equity stake.
Correct.
So explain to me how financially dollars come back to the city through that equity holding.
Under the KBTL LOI, there would be a point in the future where the city could notify KBTL it wanted to monetize its interest, and there would be an appraisal or some sort of third-party valuation, and then KBTL would be willing to buy the city's interest back. That's not specified with any precision, but obviously in fairness to KBTL, none of the buyback terms have been specified by any of the parties.
Councilor Shannon.
Thank you. Am I allowed to ask more than one question?
Let's just do one question on first round. Let's not be greedy. Let's share the time.
There's concern about how user information is shared, and I don't think that that is something that any of the offers have spoken to. And since I'm going to expect you don't have an answer on that, I'm just going to put that out there and go on to one of my other questions. But I would like an answer at some point about how user information is handled with the different bidders. Also, we currently offer low-income households a discounted rate, which I think is a lifeline rate, and I didn't know if there was anything regulatory about that, if it would be expected to continue in the same way for all offers, or if there's a difference, if there's a commitment to the lifeline rate on some and not on others?
Okay, I think that's a question.
I'll leave them both for
Let's start
Stephen.
with the regulatory. Is there any regulatory obligation looking to our outside counsel? Or Stephen, okay.
Lifeline's a recently introduced program.
Please speak right into the mic, sir.
Right. Lifeline's a recently introduced program. As you all know, that we've just bought into BT. Indications from both buyers from conversation I've had is that Lifeline would continue unchanged.
We have 3 buyers.
I take it for granted KBTL would not change it. The other 2 indications are they have no interest in changing that. It's clearly something we could address in the legal documents as we move forward.
I thought there was also a question about whether there's a regulatory requirement to have a lifeline rate.
There is. It's a federal program. The issue is possibly more whether the federal program continues or not.
I thought Councilor Shannon was asking about the state level.
Yeah, is it required? Is it any part of that required?
In order to operate, or no, it's a subsidy. It's a federal subsidy of $9.25 a month, which has historically been available for cell phone users, has just recently been extended to internet users as well. You can't get 2 a month, but you can choose whether to apply it to cell phone or internet. And those are the current rules.
Okay, I thought that there was something specific in Ting's offer about about Lifeline as well as other programs that they were contributing to, and I didn't see anything in the other 2 offers. But you are telling me that it would be the same no matter who is the buyer.
That's the indication I've had from conversations I've had, and I wouldn't expect any different.
City Attorney?
Just to clarify a little bit, the Lifeline program is a federal program, as Stephen said, that recently BT applied to become I forgot, there's some initials for a particular kind of provider so that we can have the Lifeline program. BT got that certification, went through a process with the Public Service Board to get that, and has that designation now. And we have been including in our negotiations that we want all the bidders to continue that program. And Stephen has done a great job of making a really strong case for why that it is a good thing for Burlington Telecom and as a business and for continuing in the community.
Okay, so there'll be opportunity on future rounds. This is still questions, like across the board questions for all bidders. I have Councilor Wright, then I have Paul, Mason, Tracy, and then I have Jang. Others? Okay.
Thanks. Can you tell me, the BTAB established a set of criteria. Can you tell me if each one of the bids met all the criteria, and if any one of the 3 did not, can you identify what the criteria was that they did not meet?
Can I get David to come up on that?
Is David willing?
Come on.
Okay.
Because it was so close in the range of the minimum, there was a concern from the BTAB when we sent that forward, and that was clear in our explanation. Other than that, the criteria, we felt that everyone addressed the criteria. To the degrees of how they met the criteria vary, but we believe you have in front of you bidders that have sufficiently met the criteria.
And can city attorney talk about the issue that Mr. Provost just identified? As to whether the bid met the qualified purchasing amount? Was that what you?
Yep.
The minimum sale price.
That is not a question that is easy to say absolutely, solidly, legally one way or another, but at this point, we have not raised an issue about whether or not the KBTL bid, for example, meets the minimum sales price. We have not heard that issue being raised by any of the other parties.
You're saying that that is not an issue?
I'm saying that we have not sat down and done an analysis of how the financial pieces work out. So far, the city has been treating it as if the minimum bid is met.
Okay,
Where's your answer? Councilor Paul, then Mason, Tracy, Jang, and then we're going to go bid by bid.
Okay, thank you, President Nodell. So I have a question that applies to all three of the offers about the carried interest. And all three of the offers have given the city the option of a carried interest as opposed to taking the cash.
Correct.
Okay, they range from 13% to, I believe is one of them, around 33%. That is, or 23.
There's the mathematical calculation, which in the case of KBTL is 13.46%. In the case of Shores is 20.5%. In the case of Ting, 20.05%. And Shores has agreed to allow the city to contribute incremental capital to increase its interest to 33%.
Okay, thank you. That was what I had thought. So this sale, and I guess this is more a legal question, so this sale will then go from us to the Public Utilities Commission. And I'm wondering if there are any regulatory hurdles that we would have to go through to be able to have a carried interest in the successful entity, I mean the successful bidder, and how you see that playing out for each of them.
The short answer to that question is yes, there are hurdles that are there for maintaining a carried equity interest. We have a provision in our charter that states that that you're allowed to have a joint venture to do a telecom, but there's a countervailing provision that also requires the Public Utility Commission to, and I'm going to quote it actually, because I think it's, where did it go? So the statute that I'm referencing is section 438 of the city charter, and it states that the Public Utility Commission, before issuing a CPG, a certificate of public good, must ensure that any and all losses from these businesses, and I'm going to skip a little bit, and any and all costs associated with investment in cable television, fiber optic, and telecommunications network are borne by the investors in such business and in no event are borne by the city's taxpayers, the state of Vermont, or are recovered in rates from electric ratepayers, excuse me. So while you're allowed to participate in a joint venture, we have this countervailing protection that is going to be examined to figure out whether there are any losses associated that could be associated with this investment. In addition, in issuing a certificate of public good, the CPG will look at the financial stability of the new operator and its owners, and will look at the management experience and technical expertise. In looking at the financial stability piece, well, I'm getting off topic, I guess, but I'm getting off topic. Anyway, the first part is the answer to your question, so.
And I would add one more thing to that, which is in addition, because the money that was originally put into Burlington Telecom was a combination of money borrowed from Citibank and taxpayer dollars that went into Burlington Telecom. Over the years since then, there's been a lot of ratepayer money invested back into it as well, but it's very hard for the Public Utility Commission to separate all that and say, if the city were to roll over its interest into this new entity, would that be putting taxpayer dollars at risk of loss in the future? We can't anticipate how the Public Utility Commission will answer that question, but it will certainly be one of the considerations that comes up in the regulatory process.
All set. Councilor Mason and then Tracy.
Thank you, President Nadell. This is directed to the city attorney. Could you, I think for the public's benefit, we've had the benefit of getting this advice. Could you walk through, other than the Public Utilities Commission, which you've just touched on, the other required consents that would be required as part of this transaction, thinking specifically of Blue Water and city, or I shouldn't say, back up. Are there any of the three offers that have been presented, are there other consents or risks that the city might face, for example, in accepting one offer as distinguished from another?
Under the Blue Water Agreement, there's a provision that allows them to go and take a look back and make a determination about whether a first-time operator, whether there's a reasonable likelihood that a first-time operator will be approved by the Public Utility Commission. So that's a kind of an extra step for any first-time operator.
Okay, thank you.
All set?
Yes.
Councilor Tracy and then Jang.
So Councilor Mason's question actually sets up mine pretty well, and I just am curious, one person made reference to Ting being operating in the fiber to home realm since 2015. So can you speak to how long each of these particular bidders has been doing specifically fiber to the home operation?
Ting's fiber business is relatively new, and I will ask Stephen if he knows the exact time Ting began its fiber to the home. I do not, but it's relatively new and a limited number of communities. I'll have to, if it's up to me, I will have to follow up with that, with answering that question, so that in fairness to Ting and in fairness to answering it correctly for you.
Okay, thank you.
In the case of Shores, they have been in the cable business for about 50 years, I believe. Their fiber to the home business.
Because fiber to the home is a relatively new medium, although they've been in the triple play and broadband business for almost 50 years, I believe fiber to the home probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 years. So neither of them have a long period in fiber to the home because it's a relatively new network material.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jeng.
Thank you, President Adele. Terry, this is a specific question for you. And for the record, what is your involvement for the public about these 3 bids, about the process of selling Burlington Telecom? What is your involvement? That's the first part of my question.
Okay. Our scope with the sales process began working with both the BTAB and the City Council to advise on the process. We were recipients of inquiries from various parties dating back to 2010 expressing interest. So our first step was to contact all of the parties that made initial inquiries to gauge their interest and make a determination if they were worthy of further conversation. We began speaking with the KBTL group very early on. In fact, we encouraged an initial presentation that KBTL made to the city in June of 2012, and we have been working closely with all of the interested parties. There were 8 LOIs, as you know. Most of them were a result of either us contacting a potential buyer or a buyer contacting us. There was one of the 8 that came in through the City Council, made a very serious offer, but was late in the game, and it didn't appear that it would make the first cut. So other than that particular offer, we worked closely with all of them.
And you represent Dorman and Fawcett, right?
Well, we represent the city. I'm one of the founders of Dorman and Fawcett.
Okay. Now, what are you getting if we find a buyer? What Dormans and Fawcett is getting around this deal?
There are a few things that we get. First of all, in order to obtain the bridge financing, which is known as the Blue Water financing, but there's a little bit of history that is useful to review. We had a planning session with the city when we were trying to work through potential settlement with Citibank, because to refresh everybody's recollection, we were in the middle of a court case where Citibank was seeking to pull all of the fiber and shut the business down. We reached an agreement with Citibank which was the cornerstone of the ultimate settlement, but at the time we were having difficulty finding financing. We finally found a special situation municipal funding source that became one of the finalists at the time of the bridge financing in late 2014, and that was the first of 3 funding sources that we brought in. There was a competition, and Blue Water ultimately prevailed. The interesting footnote on all of those financings, none of them were interested in providing the financing until we agreed to not be paid until the end. Ordinarily in our work, we're paid on a current basis. When we agreed to subordinate any of our fees for our work until after the bridge financing source was repaid. So we will, at the conclusion, we will be paid for the work that we've done to date, and then there will be an additional payment that is based on a percentage of the sales price.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Chang.
I'm sorry, but lastly,
Okay,
my
so
question,
you're onto your third question.
they all related.
Yes,
But
but
in order to
everyone
get
else
the-
just got one question, so I'll just hold on, and when we come back around, other people will have another opportunity, and I'll be happy to queue you up. Everyone's got lots of questions. So I'd like to ask a question for that's also an across-the-board question. And then we're going to go to questions specific to Keep BT Local, and I'm going to be going first to people who haven't asked a question yet. So if you haven't asked a question yet, your time is about to come. Okay. So one thing that we've heard from the public is that it's with the Keep BT Local offer, we know what their financing is. We know how much they're borrowing. We know the interest rate. Therefore, we know that they're going to have to make a rate of return that's adequate to repay that debt. And then a little bit more in order to finance their plans to expand. With the others, because they are apparently telling us that they can finance their bids with cash.
Correct.
The cost of funds is obviously non-zero because there's always some cost to capital, but it's not as explicit as in the Keep BT Local bid. But they will obviously have some target rate of return that they expect to make on their capital. Now, the council, I believe, has received some pro formas that will allow us to evaluate and compare those minimum required rates of return. So, but just based on the industry, because those are going to be subject to non-disclosure agreements, what is in your judgment in this industry, what kind of rate of return would a Schurz and a Ting just be expecting from this investment? Do you have any way of saying?
I don't, and the reason is that both Schurz and Ting are strategic buyers, and whenever a strategic buyer evaluates an investment, they're taking a variety of matters into consideration. So, for instance, Ting is early in the fiber business. This represents a large and important acquisition for them, and is obviously part of their consideration. I can't say how they weigh that, but we certainly would be more than willing to ask them for more color on it. In the case of Schurz, their acquisitions, they approach their acquisitions as a long-term buy and hold, and Burlington is attractive to them on that basis.
Okay, so that's just something that I'll be very interested in getting an understanding as I look at the pro formas, and so just want the community to know that that is something that at least some of us will be looking at. So now questions on Keep BT Local. Hands from anyone who hasn't. Okay, I'm going to go with Roof. Okay, Councilor Roof.
Thank you. I have plenty of questions, but I'll stick to one very specifically to anti-monopoly future sales restrictions with regard to KBTL. By my understanding from information that's been in the public and conversation that we've had, that there's no contemplation by the co-op bid of any future sale. That's the first part of the question. Is that correct, or is my assumption wrong?
That's my understanding.
Okay. So by my understanding of this, and I want to flesh this out just a little bit because I think it's important I need to understand this, and I think others should too, is that with the financial dynamics of the co-op bid, we recognize that there's some risk, and just with any business venture, I suppose there's risk, regardless of it's the co-op or not. If the co-op, and I'm assuming they just did not contemplate any business failure, but in the world of real business, if a failure did occur, the assets would be foreclosed on by Maine Fiber Company. Is that correct?
It is.
Okay. And under the current agreement, if that were to happen in some future universe, that they were chosen, would it be Maine Fiber that would be able to direct the sale of the assets that we call BT today?
We have not seen the full Maine Fiber financing agreement, and I would guess, just based on the correspondence, that one doesn't exist because there's a letter of intent to provide the financing and then followed up by a limited commitment. They will have, I expect, all of the standard rights that any lender would have, and in terms of being able to repossess and sell the assets. By way of background, this was one of the issues that was tricky with Citibank, because Citibank had the right to litigate in court, but they could not come and take it away because they did not have a permit to operate.
I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay. First round only. I have Councilor Moore.
So if the co-op were to get it, and obviously, hopefully, they would do well and be able to refinance their debt at a lower rate and all of that. If, as Councilor Roof was just discussing, that weren't the case, what is the possibility that or has it been discussed that the city could potentially purchase it back? Or to assist the co-op in any way in keeping it going?
I'll make a broad comment that I think there are a lot of questions, public comments and questions that have been made whereby additional terms could be included in the agreement with any of these parties. And so I think that something like that could be included, but I'm worried that doing so would likely run afoul of the legal or statute requirement that was referenced earlier. In other words, there would have to be some sort of pre-approval for the city to do that if that was to take place. If the city was providing any financial support, it would have to be within the guidelines referenced by council.
Are you all set, Councilor Moore?
Can I just
You may.
follow up? So there's been some talk of having a right of first refusal, and I'm thinking something similar if Keep BT Local were to own BT and there was some issue going on. Could there be something like a right of first refusal? I think I'm looking to the city attorney to comment maybe on what I just asked and like first.
You're saying a right of first refusal in connection with a foreclosure?
Yes.
There isn't anything in the documents right now proposing that, but if I understand what you're saying is if KBTL defaulted on its loan to Maine Fiber, that a right of first refusal that would allow the city to pay Maine Fiber back its $10 million?
I'm curious if that's been in any discussions.
Not that we're involved with, and I think what Terry's saying is that you're back to that. How do you put more taxpayer dollars into an asset when the law says you can't put taxpayer dollars into it?
Okay, so we can come back to this because I have a follow-up and I think others do too. So Councilor Busher is the only one that didn't have a first round question. Do you have a question on Keep BT Local specifically?
I do.
You have the floor.
Okay.
And let me just say, and then we're going to go to second round, but questions, anyone who's already had a question can now ask a question about Keep BT Local, and the order is Tracy, Mason, Paul, Jang, and Roof.
Thank
Councilor
you.
Busher.
So in this proposal, the city has an option to have a maximum about, you said 13% or something. if we wanted to exercise that if in that model, in a co-op model, how does that work? Has that been explored, how, the 87.5% ownership of the co-op and then the remainder being the city? How does that, can you explain that a little bit more?
I will tell you what I understand, and then we'll circle back with KBTL to provide additional information. There is a yet-to-be-formed co-op entity, and according to the KBTL LOI, the city would get 12.5% of the stock or the shares in that entity, and the remaining balance would be distributed to the members. There is a provision whereby the city could sell its interest back to the co-op, but that has not been fleshed out. There was a question asked by the KBTL group about paying the city some specific amount of money against its equity. I cautioned that that creates, I think, other challenges with the Citibank agreement. So there's the city's interest in the new, yet-to-be-formed entity would be a speculative investment. There would be no written agreement as to the city gets paid X dollars over a specific period of time.
May I just ask the city attorney about this? As you stated, whatever offer gets selected has to get approval from the public, I'm going to call it the Public Service Board, but whatever it is. And if this model was to move forward, my take from you is that there may be no option for that 87.512 whatever percent option, because they would say that would put people at risk if the co-op model defaulted. Or am I not understanding that correctly? I want to link these two together to understand what that risk is, if any.
My understanding is that the Shores and Ting offer allow for you to take the proceeds of the sale in cash or reinvest it as equity up to, whatever amount you choose. My understanding of the KBTL offer is that you're required to take it as a carried interest. We have raised some concern about whether or not you could receive Public Utility Commission approval with a carried interest. The protections that might allow for that to happen more easily are more easily addressed when there's cash available and other rights. We haven't really fully heard through the put option that might be available in KBTL. And maybe that would be enough. I don't know.
Thank you. I have more questions, as a result of your response, but thank you very much.
Okay. So I have Councilor Tracy, then Mason, then Paul. On Keep BT Local.
Yes, thank you, President Nodell, and I appreciate it. It also kind of goes along with what Councilor Busher was asking, because my question refers to carried interests, creating complexity within the context of the PSB approval. But I guess my broader question is, would KBTL meet that definition of a qualified purchaser?
I'm not sure.
Okay, has anybody asked Mr. Pecor if they would? Are we able to do that?
We have not asked him because if part of, I think, if you all decide you want to go forward with something, we don't want him locked into a position one way or another. So part of what you're asking are some questions that we've left open for negotiation and the ability to move the city in the direction that you all decide you want to move in.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Mason, then Paul, then Jang.
Thank you, President Nodell. My question is also for the city attorneys. Big picture, you know, KBTL offers $12 million. The other offers are significantly higher. Understanding that there's a waterfall of proceeds, you know, we have signed contracts that got us to this point that require us to deliver a certain percentage of the proceeds to various parties, including Citibank. I'm curious your opinion in terms of whether it somewhat ties into the fiduciary question that was asked earlier. If this council were to go with a $12 million bid, is it your position that we potentially face litigation from city capital or the taxpayers or anyone else?
Well, I always hesitate to put words in someone else's mouth, but from my perspective as an attorney, I would have to say there is risk there that needs to be considered.
I concur.
So, to put you in a position that attorneys, as an attorney myself, don't like to be, you know, we're having to evaluate that risk, and I'm wondering, you know, is this a 1% risk? Is this a 99? I mean, again, I'm trying to put some parameters. Saying there's risk doesn't help much, other than to know that you have a concern that if we were to accept a $12 million offer, city capital, who's entitled to potentially 25% of $15 million that's not being paid, may very well say, hold on a sec, you know, we're entitled to some piece of that.
That's what I was trying to say. I think what we're trying to say is it would not be in the city's best interest for us to right now say to you, here are the kinds of claims that somebody could bring against the city, and invite them to make those claims. And so it really wouldn't be in the best interest of everyone for us to really give you, go down and say, here are all these claims that they could bring, and it would be our chance of success on them right now. I mean, we're happy to do more of that for you in executive session. That would not put the city in a negative position because we wouldn't be broadcasting it to anyone who might want to bring a claim. But in terms of the general session, we are definitely confirming to you that we believe there is risk.
That's your question, Councilor Mason.
Yes,
I think you're
thank
set.
you. Yep.
Councilor Paul.
Thank you. So my question for on this particular offer is relates to their working capital reserves, the ability that all businesses need to have working capital when they start, and then the access to be able to the ability to access capital through borrowing. In other words, for being able to maintain cash flow, continue the build out and potential expansion. So I went on to KBTL's website, and I'm just trying to understand where these numbers come from. And it feels like there's a couple of numbers that are like appearing twice, and I just want to make sure I understand. It says the sources of the fund are the $10 million debt from Maine Fiber. Then it says a minimum of $1 million in preferred equity offering via milk money, and it says on their website that they have raised roughly $250,000, although I have heard that it's a little bit high, it's higher than that at this point. And then there's the $1.5 million of non-cash equity that the city would put in, so to speak. Then they say the uses of the funds are 10.5 million in cash to pay off existing investors with the 12% ownership by the city. And then it says a $500,000 injection into the new company, which is not counted toward the headline price of the deal. So what does that exactly mean? Do they have 500,000 in working capital that they would on day one be putting into the entity? And where does that come from? Where do they have that?
My calculation, yes, they do. 10 million comes from Maine Fiber. 1.5 million comes from the city of Burlington, not in cash, but in in-kind payment. They're raising $1 million. 500,000 of that million reaches their 12 million, is the last brick in the wall for their 12 million purchase price. And then there's an extra 500,000, as I understand it, that is for opening day working capital.
Okay, so then we have a copy, I think KBTL gave us a copy of a letter from Maine Fiber that's dated September 7th. And it talks about the offer that Maine Fiber is making to KBTL to get the $10 million. And item number 7, it says prior to execution of the loan agreement, KBTL has to bring, all these conditions have to be met. One of them is that KBTL has an additional $1 million beyond the loan. So if they're using 500,000 as working capital, where is the other $1 million coming from?
I had read that, and I don't know if my reading is correct, but my reading was that in addition to the 10 million provided in the 14% interest rate loan from Maine Fiber, the KBTL would be raising $1 million in preferred equity, and that's the $1 million that that Maine Fiber is requiring. And I may have misread that, but I think that's the $1 million that they're referring to.
But didn't you just say that half of that is the 500,000 that's going towards working capital?
Yes, yes. And the way I'm reading it is their Maine Fiber wants to make sure that that $1 million, half of which is going to be used for purchase price and the other half being used for working capital, exists. And I may be reading that wrong, but that's the way I read the document.
Well, I would like to know what that exactly means, because it appears, I mean, again, I don't know, but it seems as though they're counting $500,000 twice. And maybe I'm missing something, and I would appreciate it if you could find out.
Yeah, I'll run it down and circulate it by email.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Paul. Councilor Jang, you have your one question on Keep ET Local.
Thank you, President Odell. Do you know the mechanism in which Keep BT Local will be converting BT into a cooperative model? If you don't know, for the fairness of the updated LOIs, for the fairness of the public, can you bring the 3 bidders back for a Q&A from both the public and the council again?
So just for clarification, whether the bidders are invited back is a matter for the full council and the mayor to discuss. So just the other part of the question, please. That is, how would they convert? How would that work, converting, actually creating a cooperative business after they bought the assets?
My understanding from conversations with KBTL as recently as today is that there would be a corporate entity formed where the cooperative members would all have a share in it. The assets of BT would be purchased by that entity and distributed to all of the co-op members would have their participatory interest. I'm not sure I'm answering the question correctly, but I believe that was the question.
You still have the floor, Councillor Jang, if you have a follow-up, or?
No, thank you.
Okay, we have Councillor Roof, and then Shannon, still on keep, and then Dean, and then I think we should move on maybe to another bidder.
Okay.
Roof, Shannon, Dean.
Thank you. I want to talk about the service contracts that are required in the KBTL proposal. It states generally that the city and the school district are required to sign on to a 10-year contract at current prices. The first question is just a yes or no question, or rather up or down. Are we expecting in the marketplace the costs of those services to go up or down over that 10-year period?
I'll let Stephen address.
That's an almost impossible question to answer because the likelihood is that those services will change over that 10-year period. If you're looking at just fiber broadband internet, that may continue to go down, particularly at the top end of the market as it becomes more commoditized. But services are a lot more than that, and they're constantly changing amongst many of our larger customers.
Fair enough. So, and I'm wondering that whether or not this requirement, this 10-year locked-in rate is related to the loan that Maine Fiber is offering. Particularly, are these two contracts in any way securing the loan that has been offered to KBTL?
We'll verify. When I read it initially, I assumed it was just an alignment of terms, 10-year loan, 10-year term on services.
Well, I would have, nope, I'll stop there.
Councillor Shannon, Dean, and Wright, and I'm concerned about having enough time for the other bidders and giving equal treatment to all. So let's just keep that in mind as we move through this. Thank you. Councillor Shannon, Dean, Wright.
Thank you. My question is about the financing. If the cash that's required by the financing has been verified, and if KBTL has a fallback position, if we're not allowed to have a carried interest in this, how will they finance the rest of that? And also that they're financing 100% of the asset, but only own 87.5%, and I didn't really understand how that works.
For the purposes of percentage ownership and capital, the capital stack, we're looking at all of the debt as capital in the KBTL proposal. We have not asked KBTL whether or not they have the ability to raise an additional $1.5 million or the exact amount that would be required should the city either elect not to take equity or be prohibited from taking equity. But we'll follow up on that.
Councillor Dean.
So currently, BT Telecoms are understood to be Burlington employees, is that correct? And share in the pension system?
Yes.
So once once Burlington Telecom is purchased by one of these bidders, they are no longer employees of Burlington, but there's a pension liability that's associated with their tenure with Burlington Telecom as city employees, correct?
Yes.
Can you characterize what, the amount of that, and how would what would be required to discharge that pension liability to the
This is
rest
not
of
a
the
question
city?
for Mr. Dorman, I
No,
don't
this is
believe.
more a question for
The way that the city's pension plan works is right now at the end of each fiscal year, our auditors put together a report that attributes portions of the city's pension liability to different enterprises of the city. As of fiscal year 2016, the part of the pension that is the city's unfunded pension liability that's attributable to Burlington Telecom was about $1.1 million. What that will look like at the time of closing is unclear at this point, but it seems very likely, given that was the number at the end of fiscal year 16, that there will be a fairly substantial amount of cash that you all should probably plan. When I say you all, I mean the council should be planning to put into the pension system as a result of the fact that all of the BT employees will cease to be city employees, and that liability will become in some way, if not fixed, at least solidified in some way.
Okay. So just to be clear, this is not an issue that is unique to Keep BT Local. Correct?
Absolutely.
And this is something that, at our request, we're going to discuss at the Board of Finance meeting on October 16th. Councilor Wright.
Thank you, President Odell. So when Burlington Telecom was originally established, one of the reasons it was established was to provide competition for the bigger cable companies. What's being said now in terms of the regard to the issue of affordability, I think that's one of the criteria, and one of the important things that I hear asked to me from subscribers of Burlington Telecom is that we want to make sure that this doesn't become unaffordable with whoever takes over the company. Is there I think people that are part of KBTL or supporters of KBTL believe that they will have an advantage, inherent advantage in keeping the terms more affordable for its subscribers. Is that true, that their model will likely end up being more affordable than the other two? Is there any way to answer that?
I don't think so. What I would say is a few things. First of all, both of the other buyers have proposed a no price increase for a period of time. There's nothing that requires that the city accept that. I mean, the city can ask for a longer period of time. We're not obligated to sign up to every condition that's been put forth. Maybe we want to go back and ask for a significantly longer period of time. Based on what I know about the entities that have bid, they're all interested, KBTL, Shores, and Ting, in being as competitive as possible, offering as lowest cost service possible. I mean, they are businesses for a profit, but they understand that they have to be competitive in this market.
And so right now what's on the table is one company has a 5-year.
Shores has a 5-year no increase on internet, and Ting has a 30-month no increase.
And that's no increase on the current prices that subscribers of Burlington Telecom are paying?
Correct, with the exception of pass-through of video content costs. That's the only area that BT has increased its price. When the programming content goes up, we've passed that through, but other than that, no.
And KBTL is there anything there? The other two have proposals out there, 5 years, 30 months. Is there anything with KBTL?
No.
Okay.
Okay, so Council President Odell is going to take her Keep BT Local question now, and then Busher and Moore still have had only one question. So I wanted to follow up on some earlier questions about questioning what the risks are associated with the $12 million bid of Keep BT Local, and these are questions for the attorneys. So the Citibank settlement says it has to be an arm's length transaction. That seems to be the key concept there. And with Blue Water, there's a minimum price requirement that we've discussed earlier we were advised that you haven't made a ruling that Keep BT Local does not meet that.
Correct.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify those 2 points. Okay. So now we're going to go on to questions about Shores. So hands if you have questions about Shores. Okay. Any Moore or Busher? Okay, we're going to go to Busher, then Moore, then back to others and we'll start with Councilor Paul, and I'll cue it up from there. Busher, Moore, and Paul.
So, yeah, excuse me. So the letter of intent goes through by Shores making
Councilor,
these-
please speak right into them. We're having sound problems tonight, so I think if everyone does try to really speak into the mic, it's going to help. Sorry.
Okay, certainly. Can you hear? Can you hear that? Okay, great. So it has to do with one of the bullets where they say that, you know, they keep their investments, but then they go on to say the experience of the local BT management team coupled with Shore's leadership team ensures that regardless of the type of acquisition, whether traditional cable, fiber, or other network platforms that may be considered in the future, we have the operational and technical ability to effectively integrate the entity into BT.
What page is that on, Councilor?
This is on page 2. And so I'm not quite sure, I'm not sure if I really understand that. It seems that on one hand, I thought they were talking about their acquisition and integration, and then on the other hand, I thought they might be talking about BT being acquired. So can you just explain that to me a little bit better?
I can, because I've been involved in conversations about that. They were trying to make the point that they were intending to use BT as an opportunity for expansion through the Burlington footprint, so to speak. So as they expanded in the region, they would look to BT as the headquarters of that expansion. And that's what they're trying to relate to here.
So they're talking about BT still being part of them, but they would be acquiring other entities in the region and integrating them into their
I think they're
their
thinking.
family?
I think they're thinking that BT potentially could make an acquisition funded by Shores but run by BT employees.
I see.
Trying to emphasize that we want to grow this business for the local economy.
Okay. Can I, one question, right?
One question.
That's all right, okay.
Thank you very much, Councilor. I have Councilor Moore, Paul, Shannon, Roof, and anyone over here. I'll look over here next. You're on.
Thanks. So my question is really the same for Shores and Ting. And it's reflective of a lot of what people from the community have talked to some of us about. So we have all these different items in the agreement. Councilor Wright was talking about the rates. We heard about rates actually at a community meeting that we had last week. Someone had looked at rates from both Shores and Ting, just their normal rates. So, you know, after the 30 months or the 5 years goes, I'm just curious what expectation people in Burlington could have that some of these pieces of this agreement that are so important to us, rates being primary, what assurances we could have that these things continue into the future. And if for some reason some large entity were to buy Shores, what would say then happen to some of these negotiated items?
I believe, whether it's the case of Shores or Ting, as the seller in control of this asset during this period, the city has the right to ask for anything reasonable with respect to that. So for instance, there was a public comment earlier, well, what happens if the acquiring business is taken over in some sort of a sale? The city certainly has a right to ask for other protections and expect some of those. So if it's a longer price guarantee, that's reasonable. If it is protecting the BT in the event of a takeover of the buyer, that's reasonable. If it is limiting future debt on the assets of BT, that's reasonable. We're not at the end of the road with the ultimate agreement. So if there are points that are critical to the council and to the residents and taxpayers of Burlington, they should be added and they should be part of the consideration.
Thank you.
Councillor Paul.
Thank you. So my question for Schurz relates to the letter that they sent us back in June, on June 5th. And one of they put under item C on the first page, they said additional deal terms. We would like to engage Stephen Barraclough through Dorman and Fawcett in a 2-year consulting agreement with Schurz and Burlington Telecom. I can certainly understand why. You have done an amazing job in turning around Burlington Telecom for the city, for its ratepayers, and we're very fortunate that you have done all that you have for us. My question is, are you committing to that? Is Dorman and Fawcett going to have a continued participation in any way, or are you, Stephen, going to have any continued association with Burlington Telecom through Schurz, should Schurz be the successful bidder for BT?
We'll both answer it, but we took off the table any ongoing Dorman and Fawcett involvement post-transaction, other than we're absolutely dedicated to making sure the transition goes well, and we'll spend whatever reasonable amount of transition time is required. But we told all of the buyers at different points in time, we can't be part of the future entity in any way because of concerns over our involvement in the conflict.
Okay, thank you.
So just for clarification, I thought we were here tonight talking about the most recent versions of the letters of intent. Is that in their most recent version?
It is not.
Okay. Councillor Shannon, Roof, then Tracy.
Thank you. My question is about the build-out. A lot of people in my neck of the woods don't have Burlington Telecom. And Schurz LOI, they agree to spending a minimum of 6.2 to 8.84 million in capital projects in accordance with the updated BT capital plan, both maintaining and expanding the current network for fiscal 2019 through 2021. Is that a commitment just to use the capital generated by BT in their cash flow, to use that for capital expenditure, or is it a commitment that even if the cash flow isn't there, they're committed to investing that capital in maintenance and build out?
The latter.
Thank you.
Councillor Roof.
My question is about the equipment in Memorial Auditorium. Both Ting and KBTL address it, I think, at some point, how they will approach that. It's a blind spot for me with Schurz, can you give us any indication on what the plan is? And then a second quick follow-up, is that $800,000 estimate, where'd that come from, and is it accurate?
I'll let Stephen answer, and I'll cover the Shores relocation cost reimbursement, but I'll let Stephen reference the 800,000.
The the 800,000 is an update of an original estimate that we did on the cost of moving BT's facilities out of Memorial Auditorium a couple of years ago. It is current, it's accurate, but it requires an extended period of time to be able to deliver that move at that cost. It's not a quick move, it's around 12 months, maybe 15 months, but yes, that is a current accurate cost to relocate those facilities.
With respect to the Shores offer, they're not specific on that reimbursement. It was discussed at length, and it's a line item that'll require further clarification.
Thank you.
Councillor Tracy?
Thank you. So I'm a little bit confused with this proposal as to, they make statements regarding local control being important and talking about how, to quote it, they'll keep BT's local decision authority. Burlington Telecom is not a minor spoke of a centralized operation. Schurz values local leadership, local presence, and local staffing. And then, if we go on to look at point 2 on page 4, where it talks about continuing to have local employees with a local presence, in that same point, it talks about the fact that they have a Maryland call center, and for one company, and that in another company they use an Iowa company outsources it. But that they say that in the context of the Burlington company, that the Burlington management team would make that decision. But I don't understand how a Burlington management team would be able to make a decision that would stick with the ownership company. So I don't understand how a company that is a team that answers to that company wouldn't have their decision superseded by the bigger company when it came to those decisions of keeping local. So can you sort of speak to that interaction between the Burlington management team and the local team and the decision-making authority within each body?
Sure. I think that it's a philosophical question in how the business is organized and run. What Schurz is trying to say is they will push those decisions to the greatest extent possible at the local level. They do have after-hours call center capability that BT doesn't have, so they would like to make that available to us, and we would expect, whether Stephen was making that decision or someone else, that any local manager would see that as an improvement, because right now we don't have that after-hours capability. But Schurz would have the current customer service at BT continue during the hours it operates presently.
And just to add to that, both Ting and Shores would provide 24/7 coverage. At the moment, after a certain time, 10 o'clock at night, 6 on a Sunday, we go to an answering service.
So that's what that's referencing.
Okay, so they would keep the Burlington the Burlington Telecom current call center operation in Burlington.
Shores.
Shores
Yes.
would during the day, and then transfer to the Maryland at night. Is that correct?
That is the intention, yes. Rather than go to an answering service which is out of state anyway, it would go to an actual person who could still provide technical help.
Okay, all right, thank you for clarifying.
And we believe an improvement.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Councillor Jang, is this the question about Schurz?
Yes.
You're on.
President, yes.
I know, I'm
How
cracking the
about-
whip tonight.
How about rebranding? Will they rebrand the name of BT? Will it become Shores? And also, can you talk about a little bit about the board management? I mean, will there be a local board management of Shores or BT Shores?
First, the rebranding. It will stay Burlington Telecom. And I would expect that's a agreement point that would be made in writing if it became important for us. So it's something that certainly could be specified in writing. They would have some local board as it relates to BT, but not a local board as it relates to Shores.
Thank you, Council. Let's move on to questions about Ting. First, bite of the apple for Dean, Mason, Wright, Busher, Moore, and myself. Questions about Ting? Any questions for the Ting bid? Wait a minute. Hold on. No questions for the Ting bid. Councilor Mason.
Thank you, President Nodell. Terry, could you flesh out a little bit about the Ting offer has a unique feature relating to the community investment? I was just hoping you could speak to that for a moment.
We asked both Ting and Shores to, in their revised LOIs, expand or flesh out the community investment. And Ting, as you can see, put together a longer list and a very specific dollar value that they're investing annually, $250,000. That's not to say that Shores is not doing the same, but Shores LOI was not as specific on that point.
And could you just sort of break down for the public who may not know, how does that $250,000 shake out in terms of Ting's LOI?
Ting's LOI is a $60,000 annual investment or each year to the BT Ignite initiative, $50,000 to free TV advertising for local startups and community events. And then there are a remainder of additional programs. They don't specify an allocation across the various programs. Just by way of comparison, the city is making a $25,000 a year investment in BTV Ignite, and Dorman and Fawcett has made a $12,500 investment in BTV Ignite. And Stephen was essential in getting the whole BT Ignite initiative started.
Thank you.
Is there a question about the Ting proposal from Councilor Dean, Wright, Busher, or Moore? Seeing none, Councilor Dean?
I prefer to defer. Are we going to continue this, or?
I'm asking those four councilors, do you have a question on Ting?
I'll just continue my line of questioning that I had concerning the
Please speak into the mic, sir.
the deferred pension liability. What potential is there for Shures to address the cash required to address that liability?
Because this is an asset sale, none of the entities, KBTL, Ting, or Shores, takes on the pension liability per se, but the Ting and Shores LOIs have adequate cash available to the city should the city accept either cash or a combination of cash and equity to address whatever issues, pension liability and whatever else needs to be considered as part of the transaction.
Thank you.
Councilor Busher. On Ting, please.
Yes. Yes, on Ting.
You're on second round.
Okay, so I need your interpretation on this.
That's not a document I brought, so I may have to take a look at it, but I remember
That's okay, I can read the, so when I read this.
What page, councilors?
Well, So it's in the Hey Burlington, September 2017, and I frankly don't know what page it is. It's keeping BT local. A fiber business needs to be hyper-local to thrive, and sales support and account management staff. There are 2 pages. So in the other letters of intent, there was specific statements about keeping the existing team together. But this doesn't seem as straightforward. This says we want to retain all team members who are driven and interested in the future of BT. That isn't really a commitment to keeping people that are currently employed at BT here. And then it talks about, in addition, staff will have the opportunity to support other markets while being based locally in Burlington. So, Terry and Stephen, I'm really feeling like staff will change, and I know this will bring about change anyways, but I also feel like the attention to BT will be diluted. Potentially people will be looking at BT, but looking at this entity, that entity, that entity. And throughout this document, it really speaks about individual success more than entity success. And so I'd just like your take on that particular read on these 2 statements and what my overarching statement was. Thank you.
The Ting model is a more centralized management model, and there's no single right answer, but in terms of understanding the difference, one is centralized, the other is decentralized. What Ting is saying in that point, I believe, is that Burlington employees will, one, have the opportunity to be involved with other Ting locations, even if they are here, and Burlington employees, to the extent they want to move within the Ting family of companies, can. The Shores model is a more decentralized model where more will happen here rather than at the headquarters. But it's important to point out that Ting has put a huge investment emphasis on the culture of customer service, and their other businesses require a level of excellence in that they're dedicated to the proposition of making sure Burlington operates at that level. They will get there a little differently than Shores, but it's a stylistic and what has worked for them in the past.
Thank you. That helps differentiate the 2 and solidifies my feelings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. So I'm still on people who are on the 3rd round or whatever. So I have Wright, and then I'm going to give Councilor Moore an opportunity, and then I'm going to go to the next round, and I'm queued up there with Tracy and then Jang. Councilor Wright, and then I'm going to offer to Councilor Moore.
Thank you, President Odell. Affordability, being the previous issue, is a huge one, and customer service also is huge. Councilor Tracy just talked about that in regard to Shores. Could you talk a little bit more about Ting in regard to customer service? Because my understanding is that they intend to do increase the customer service from what we currently have, but go even further than what Shores is offering. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I would characterize it this way, but I'd also like Stephen to weigh in. I think it's very important as a baseline that Ting, based on our research in their other businesses, are very highly regarded in customer service, and they're providing levels of customer service that are very well reviewed, very favorably reviewed. they want to apply what they've learned in their other businesses to BT. Their approach in customer service, I believe, will be more centralized. Stephen has visited their headquarters and can comment on that. Obviously, we take pride, speaking on behalf of the city, we all take pride in the level of customer service that BT provides today to its customers, and we've said that must continue and get better as a baseline. Shores has one approach to it, Ting has another, and there isn't a single right answer.
But you're confident that both of them at least maintain the current level or better?
Yes, what I would say, and I really want Stephen to weigh in on this, and I keep talking, but what I would say is that it has to be a condition of our transaction, and generally, from Dorman and Fawcett's perspective, if something is working, improve on it, don't change it wholesale overnight, make sure that we build on it. Stephen.
Two different approaches and two different opportunities. Ting is building a meaningful fiber business and is very focused on customer service as a differentiator. It's a passion of Elliot Noss's, and I have no doubt that BT would benefit from that just customer service-centric approach. But Ting is also building a fiber and internet business. What Shores is potentially building is a regional fiber, phone, and cable business. And I think all of us who went and visited came away believing that BT's customer service was, in some respects, better than Shores's. Not in every respect, we didn't know it well enough. What Shores have said is they will respect BT's ability to continue to own the customer service experience and continue to make additional improvements. They won't force their customer service practices on BT, but there's no doubt that they are not as passionate or driven as Ting are.
Thanks.
Councilor Moore on Ting? You don't have to take it. Okay. So now we're in next round. I have Councilor Tracy and Councilor Jang and Roof. Tracy.
Thank you. One of the public commenters raised the issue of Ting being a publicly traded company, and I'm just curious as to the degree to which, a scenario in which, what the, I guess to rephrase the question, I'm curious as to what the fiduciary responsibilities that come along with being a publicly traded company and how those fiduciary responsibilities would interface with the public criteria that we set forward. I'm thinking of, for example, net neutrality. So they've said that they've committed to net neutrality, but let's just think of a situation as part of the criteria which we asked for, but let's think of a situation where net neutrality goes away or is allowed to go away because of federal regulation, and a company could charge more money to make the internet go faster for certain providers and slower for others, and if they don't pay. So and they could make more money basically off of that. Are they responsible to their shareholders to take opportunities to make more money, even if they conflict with other responsibilities like the public criteria that we set forth here? Because the public criteria are the most important thing to me. I don't really think it's my responsibility to care about the profits of a publicly traded company. So I want to understand the responsibilities that come along with that as it relates to this company and the public criteria.
I understand the question completely. I think that the city has an opportunity to get whatever is important to the city in writing. And therefore, we remove the doubt associated with whoever's buying it to get those things that are essential to us in writing, to make sure that they will not be superseded by any change, whether it's Schur's, Ting, or anybody else in business philosophy or corporate philosophy. So if there are things that are essential, and several of the public commenters raised issues, I think they become part of the agreement. I mean, there are some things that we can't write into the agreement, but I think many of the public comments could be. And so I would argue that, for instance, and one of the things that I feel strongly about is not putting debt on these assets. So there could be potentially a prohibition on leveraging specific assets for debt for any of the entities, or putting limitations on things. So there's an opportunity to craft into the agreement whatever reasonable criteria are critical to this decision, or maintaining that criteria.
So if we craft those in writing in the agreement, then that means that
that governs then.
That governs it. So the publicly traded piece would not supersede in that case.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Jang?
Yep. Along those lines, if you look at the letter, second page, fourth paragraph, where he talks about, we believe that BT is solid operationally, leaving no reason to make drastic organizational changes due to the specific local dependency of operating a successful fiber-to-home network. We anticipate seeking to retain the majority of the current BT employees. So to me, this is very clear that if they take it on, they will definitely let some people go. And it doesn't specifically say how many people would they let go. But before you get to the definitive agreement, like just what you were answering to Councilor Tracy, is it possible to explain to them that at least for maybe the 4 or 3 years after the purchase, you should not let people, any employee go? Is that possible to have those language into the definitive agreement now, or?
Yes. I think that what we need to stop short of, though, is BT has wonderful employees, but there's also some element of overreaching where if an employee is not performing in the future, it's unreasonable to have a no-cut contract, so to speak. But there certainly are provisions that could be added to protect certain items that we were concerned about. I say we, meaning the city. And I think that we can also just ask the question. There's nothing wrong with asking Ting, and as we agreed, following up on points, clarify that paragraph.
Yep. And I mean, and also based on my understanding, once we reach a definitive agreement, the city should not be involved in the management of BT anymore. But it sounds like here they're asking for the city to help them interview the BT employees to make sure who we're going to retain or who we're going to let go.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Roof.
Thank you. We have talked a little bit about the role of the PUC with respect to other bids, and I'd like to hear some perspective on how the Public Utility Commission would likely rule on the Ting offer, knowing that they'd be primarily focused on financial viability, operating capacity, and I think the taxpayer protection. That might be a question for this side.
Are you asking if Ting is financially viable? Is that the question?
That could be a good place, a
I
good
mean,
place
there's
to start.
the standards for obtaining a CPG from the Public Utility Commission, they're principally going to look at financial viability, management expertise, and technical expertise. We've had a report from the finance fellow that explains what the relative strengths are of those
Maybe an
entities.
easier question, an easier way to ask the question, is there anything from the legal perspective that the council should be aware of that's a limiting criteria in this proposal?
I don't see anything to limit the Ting proposal at all.
Councilor Shannon.
Thank you. Terry, you just said something I want to make sure that I understand and also understand the limitations. I think that you said that you can craft things into this agreement that would be binding if Ting were to be taken over by another company. We can put things in this agreement that would be binding on the next company. Is that correct?
We can ask for them. I mean, obviously, if our shopping list becomes too long, we may lose a particular buyer, but there's...
But what I mean is, if they agree to it, it's not only binding Ting, it's binding any subsequent...
Correct.
Thank you.
Because I mean, I assume that if Ting were sold, it would be a stock sale. And therefore, the new stockholders would be bound by the agreements of the old stockholders. They would be stepping into the shoes of Ting.
Great, thank you.
Seeing no other questions, I'm going to ask a question about Ting. So, kind of applies to Shores as well. If the city, in the carried interest option with Ting, and in which we would roll over the city's share of the net sales proceeds into an equity position, what is the form that those returns would take? Would the only return be if we were to trigger the put right at a to-be negotiated discount from the multiple at which they're buying BT? Or would there be annual dividends, or how would that work in the case of both Ting and Shores, or do we have enough information?
We don't have adequate information, but I can tell you generally, because we haven't gone through all of the structural components, but one shareholder, meaning the majority shareholder, would not be able to take money out of a company without giving the same treatment to a minority shareholder. So it's likely that both of these entities will want to continue to invest all of their cash flow into expanding the network. That would be my expectation, that cash flow, rather than paying dividends, would be better served to the community by better equipment, more investment in the enterprise, rather than money coming back. But if they decided to take money back for their shareholders, whatever they're taking back, the city of Burlington would get its share. They can't take their share of $1 without giving the city its share of $1. So based on, they couldn't get their 80 cents without the city getting your 20 cents.
But that's all something that would have to be specified in the agreement. Or you're just saying that's the way it works with these things?
Basically, that's the way any corporate structure would work. Certainly, there could be changes in the agreement. One of the things that is going to come up is if there's significant expansion that requires capital beyond what the enterprise can generate, then there is a question about what happens to the city's interest. Does the city's interest get diluted if there's an expansion plan that requires X millions of dollars beyond the current cash flow? And so we've talked to them about that, and details to be worked out, but that's a pretty critical component, and obviously requires further review.
Great, thank you. So I have no more questions queued up, so I think that this brings to a close the question and answer portion of the evening, and I think that we had some great questions and got some good information out for the public. So I'd like to thank Mr. Dorman for being here. I'd like to thank Mr. Bearclough for being here. And I'd like to, at this time, go back to the public forum. I'm reopening the public forum at 9:25 p.m., and I have two people who have signed up. I have Alex Field, and then I have Kevin Warden. Again, thank you very much for being here, and we will continue to be working together. Alex Friend is up. I think I said Field.
My name is Alex Friend, and I'll keep this quick. I appreciate it. I want to thank you all for holding this special session tonight. So I think it's been very informative and helpful. You know, I support the co-op because I think that model is the only way to protect us. To keep local control is to protect current and future subscribers against a market that is dominated by huge monopolistic actors. I have a question for City Attorney, and would like to know when we can make publicly available the September 1 memo.
So, Mr. Friend, this is not kind of the way public forum works.
Understood.
It would be like you're
Would like
telling
to
us
see.
what question you think we should ask.
Okay. When would the, thank you, President Nodell. When will the September 1 memo from outside counsel on the conflict of interest issue be made publicly available? Because I think that is highly germane to this discussion. And a couple of other statements. I want to thank Councilor Mason for asking City Attorney Blackwood about whether we have an obligation to Citibank to maximize taxpayer value, if you will. And if you believe that is true, don't we have an obligation to get the most for Burlington Telecom? At its estimated 2017 EBITDA, its profitability of $3.5 million, a common current valuation for telecoms is about 10 times earnings before interest, taxes, et cetera. So at that rate, Burlington Telecom could be worth as much as $35 million. So if we're not going to make it a co-op, maybe you should settle for more. Thank you for your help.
Thank you. I've got Kevin Warden and then Janet Patterson.
Good evening, members of the council. Good to see you. Thank you for your continued effort on this. I just have a few words. I'm speaking tonight as a resident and long-term subscriber since really day one for Burlington Telecom. I've loved it. It's been great. Service has been excellent. Also, I work at a business that relies daily on Burlington Telecom, and of course, as a citizen for Burlington, which it's imperative that we have a second option here and that Burlington Telecom remain viable for a very long time. So this is critical. It's imperative that we get this right, and I really appreciate the diligence with which you're deliberating this and researching the options. I'm not here to tell you which company I think is best for us. I think you're best suited to make that decision, but rather I want to share what I think are important criteria from my perspective that you consider. Service-oriented is critical. It's great to be able to pick up the phone and get answers right away and even have someone troubleshoot your modem in the house, which every time they do, they say, I'm not supposed to do this, but let me help you out here. Profitable is critical because I want a company that's going to last into the future, be sustainable, and be able to make improvements that we need and be able to keep things affordable, keep this service affordable to us and not raise costs if it becomes unprofitable. And of course, a company that supports an open and free internet with net neutrality. So for me, local is actually fairly down the list. I'm a 20-year member of the Onion River Co-op, as it was called when I started. And for me, local food is ideal. It's a great idea, and it's what we want. The internet is a much more complex procedure. And if I can make an analog quickly, which is that a similar health procedure, one wouldn't necessarily go to the most local professional but rely upon someone who's the most reliable, most experienced to get the job done. So I ask that you do that and keep the health of Burlington Telecom in mind for a long time in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Janet Patterson, and then Isabel Shasha, I believe.
Thank you very much. I have really appreciated the questions you've asked, and I've gotten to know a lot more about the three presentations for our local tel. I would urge you to look at the two companies that want to make a profit. I think we need to keep that in mind. I'm an active member of the co-op, the Onion River Co-op, and we made a profit, and we served the people with good food, and we even, when we bought something, we had a little check that we got. Keeping that money and keeping it in Burlington is important. The other thing that I really want you to consider is any company, I don't care how good they are in service, if they're not located in Burlington and they don't have local folk coming to your door or answering your question, they're not as interested in serving Burlington. So I would urge you again to look at local Burlington Tel and making it into a co-op where we actually could support it in some way. I've made my donation to it, and I know other people have, and having support for the local service that they give is so important. So I really appreciate the work you're putting into it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Isabel Shasha, and then Solveig Overby.
Hi, I'm a Champlain graduate. I'm a resident of Burlington, and I own a business here. I just wanted to say that I know that I represent a lot of people in my generation who have a large and growing interest in grassroots politics and in investing in democratic solutions to our challenges that we face these days. And people like me consider the internet public utility and a right. And furthermore, as a small business owner, I know that in the changing landscape of the near future, we're going to need a strong, flexible, and democratic organization that has the best interests of the people of our community at heart. And if we sell off our BT to a profit-driven corporation, they're inherently going to have antagonistic interests to the people of our community. And you guys are asking us, if you decide to sell off BT to an outside corporation, that you're asking us, to trust you that you can keep a profit-driven corporation accountable to whatever agreement is made. And that's a really hard sell for a large number of people in my generation that are definitely watching. So please invest in KBTL. I absolutely implore you to consider an investment in the community and an opportunity to build a strong democratic institution that can be mobilized to do what's in the best interest of our community against corporate profit-driven interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Solveig Overby.
Hi there. I know I wasn't going to speak, but I really felt like I needed to after I heard a couple of things. Councillor Dang had asked a question of Mr. Dorman about what his compensation would be, and the answer wasn't totally clear, but the compensation based on the contract from the Citibank agreement is 10% of the amount of the returns after the amount has been paid. So 10% of 12 million is different than 10% of 28 million and 10% of 30 million. So my concern, and has been concerned, that there is a conflict of interest in the information that you've been getting for several years because of this as a possible problem. If they will benefit if the price up front that the city gets is a bigger chunk of money. In fact, they may not be as able to explain the value of patronage refunds that come from a cooperative. And that's something that I think you need better advice in. They're maybe able to explain a commercial business, but patronage refunds that come to a cooperative, the city or individuals, that needs to be explained to you better, because that's value that you're not seeing as part of this deal, and it's totally explained in the Keep BT Local proposal. The third thing is, I do not know of a way that you can actually put a contractual language together to require a company to preserve net neutrality and not capitalize on paid prioritization for service. And I know I've asked Councilor Mason about possible language in that form that would be actually enforceable. And it sounds great. You can say, well, get everybody to agree to that and all these conditions. Let's just write it into the contract. But as a lawyer, you cannot write into a contract things that are enforceable a lot of times. You can write something that's great, and then when it comes down to it, it's not enforceable. And I think the net neutrality and the data protection that was asked about are not things you can write into a contract and have it enforceable. Thank you.
Thank you. James Richmond.
Hi. I am the co-chair of the Burlington Democratic Socialists of America. I just wanted to pop in and see how the progress was going for the most part. I wanted to bring a couple things up that I thought of while I was here. The first of which I believe Councilor Nodell, you brought up, talking about comparing the industry standards for return on investment. The industry is bloated in the terms of, if you see Comcast, for example, who is a massive company, their return on investment can be massive. So comparing a local option to these other industry standards is not going to balance out, at least not in my perspective. The other thing that I would really like to stress is that as a local organization, BT is essential to everything that I do, and I feel as though the way that Burlington Telecom has been structured has benefited me, has benefited many in the community, and I would hope that it would continue to do so. I will say that looking at the way that both Shores and Ting structure their price points, it's unaffordable for me. I make $32,500 a year, and to pay $90 a month for internet that actually is good, such as with Ting, is absolutely ridiculous. On the other hand, with Shores, there's some price tiers, but it's still too expensive. I mean, I pay $50 a month for 200 megabits, which is perfectly adequate for me, but to get that same, or even close to that same speed, both up and down, I would have to spend $70. I just can't get behind that, and I think that the only way to really control prices like that would be to have a democratic organization in our local community that makes sure that we hold it accountable. We can't hold these companies accountable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And that closes the second part of our public forum and brings us to the end of our agenda for the evening. Councilor Busher?
President Nodell, I would like to move to item 3.03, which are the communications.
Yes.
Just to move to accept them and place them on file?
Yes, thank you very much for that motion, Councilor Busher, on 3.03. Is there a second? Councilor Moore seconds it. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of accepting that communication 3.03 and placing it on file, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Then that completes that piece of business. We were at the end of our agenda.
Motion to adjourn.
Councilor Roof moves adjournment. Councilor Wright seconds it. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Then we stand adjourned at 9:40 p.m. Seems like good.
I did in my head, I'm like, it's not right. David Lansky. I'm on the board of KPT Local.
Oh, you're on the board? Yes. Hi.
There was a council meeting quite a few years ago when there was a proposal to